Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Rabbi Heidi Hoover. I am the rabbi of Beshert, which stands for Beth Shalom Ve'emeth Reform Temple in Brooklyn, New York. We are a Reform Jewish congregation that is open and welcoming to everyone. And it's truly a wonderful community. So, for those of you who are with us today, if you're in Brooklyn, we would love to have you come by. And if you're visiting Brooklyn ever, we'd love to see you as well. For this program today, just a few notes. We would like to have all questions held until the end. Um, so if you have a question that comes up, you can put it into the chat at any time, but most questions we'll address at the end, and we'll specifically leave time for that also at the end. Um, and so, that's kind of it for me. And oh, also, please, if you could remain muted throughout the program, that would be great. And I'll help with that as well. So, now I'm going to turn things over to Cynthia. Cynthia Grooms Katz has an AB in Foreign Area Studies, Latin America, from Barnard College, and a JD from Duke University School of Law. She has worked for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security for Refugee, Asylum, and International Operations, and currently she is the supervising attorney for HIAS, which some of our congregants are in the United States, and we're able to get to the United States because of HIAS, which does amazing, amazing work. So thank you for doing that work. And now, Cynthia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here today. I will function as the moderator for this afternoon's program, and I will try to field all the questions in the chat box with some help of my new friends, and want to start with introducing our distinguished guests, and I would also like to present their bios. So I will proceed in alphabetical order. I will introduce each person and by way of that person's bio, and then our panelists will talk and share their experiences as descendants, involvement with the Tuskegee Airmen, and we will take it from there and allow time, like we said before, for a Q&A. So the first person, again, in alphabetical order, is Raynard Burns, Ray. And he comes to us. You heard some of his music a few seconds ago. His many accomplishments include, first, he was born in New York, in Harlem, in 1946. And he follows a path that has been rewarding, inspiring, and always moving forward. And as you will hear later on in his talking, he will quote what he has heard the Tuskegee Airmen say throughout his life, straighten up and fly right. And our other speakers will talk about never using the word can't. So going back to Ray, after 40 years of directing orchestras and teaching at public school and college levels, he has been able to engage in projects and programs that reach a larger audience. In the field of music, he's appeared as a guest conductor for youth orchestras in the New York area. He is the founder and president of Raynard Burns Publishing, Inc. His compositions have been performed across the United States and abroad. He continues to present workshops and lectures about composers of color. He has served as public relations officer for the Islip Town branch of the NAACP, and that's on Long Island, Suffolk County, and has been the public relations officer for the Claude B. Govan Tri-State chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen, Inc. for many years. In 2017, Ray served as liaison between West Point and the Tuskegee Airmen for the dedication of the Benjamin O. Davis Barracks at West Point. He has received numerous awards, most recently the 2017 Golden Eagle Award from the chapter for preserving the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen. 2018, the Eastern Region Award from the National Office of Tuskegee Airmen. And just recently in 2022, the Legacy Award for Community Service from the Islip Town branch of the NAACP. Please welcome him. Moving right along, we've got a granddaughter of a fighter pilot. And this is Kim LeBlanc. And she and I also share the work that we currently do in refugee resettlement. Kim's biography to this point has been, like I said, she's the great-granddaughter of First Lieutenant Dempsey W. Morgan, a Tuskegee Airman fighter pilot in World War II. Meeting her grandfather for the first time when she was a teenager, Dempsey and Kim grew closer over the years. Throughout this time, Dempsey opened up and shared stories of his days fighting Nazi pilots while in the skies of Italy and Northern Africa. Kim is extremely proud of her grandfather for the sacrifices he made for his country, his family, for people of color across the United States. Her grandfather passed away in April 2013, but his legacy lives on through his family. Kim is married and now lives in Northern Virginia with her husband and 2 sons. She is a supervisory program officer with the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, a national refugee resettlement organization, and has worked with refugees since 2014. Kim believes in living a life full of diversity, compassion, empathy, and courage. To round out our program, I'd like to introduce you to Pat Terrelong. She has served as president of the Claude B. Govan Tri-State Chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen, Inc. for 5 years and resumed the office in 2021. She is also a heritage member and past board member of the Tuskegee Airmen, Inc., TAI. Both parents and godparents took part in what is now known as the Tuskegee Airmen experience. While attending the Congressional Gold Medal ceremony, she decided to join the local chapter of TAI in 2007 for the purpose of teaching the history and life lessons of the airmen to our children. Little did she know, the documented original Tuskegee Airmen, DOTAs, would pursue her to become their president. Not a day goes by that she does not thank her parents for all the lessons they taught. Again, to never use that word can't. To not make excuses because excuses are for losers. Put her right foot forward, hold her head up high, do not associate with naysayers, and believe she can accomplish anything she puts her mind to. It is these lessons that guide Pat in her work on behalf of the airmen here in New York. Some of her accomplishments include retain the Grand Marshal position for DOTA Span Watson in the New York City Veterans Day Parade in 2009, wrote the proposal to have the 100th Street Bus Depot renamed in honor of the Tuskegee Airmen, who after World War II entered service with the New York City Transit Authority. The Tuskegee Airmen Depot has a 6-foot plaque hanging in their honor, and the replica of the Congressional Gold Medal resides in the building and on each bus. She also had the American flag flown to the 332nd Air Base in Iraq and returned, where it now flies over the Tuskegee Airmen Depot along with an eagle. She supported the renaming of Oak Street to Tuskegee Airmen Way in Nassau County, which is where I also live. Supported the New York City Council bill to rename South Road to Tuskegee Airmen Way, with cross streets renamed after deceased airmen, Lonely Eagles, who once resided in Queens. In addition, the cross streets approved by the New York City Council bear the names of other Black units who served in World War II. Example, the Harlem Hellfighters. I am the proud daughter of an Army Air Corps member, not a Tuskegee Airman, but one of these men who did serve in World War II. Now, currently, this chapter has two new co-naming streets named after Dabney Montgomery and Bill Peace. Honored by many organizations for her work with the Airmen, some of which are Veterans Action Group, the first Outstanding Aviators Award presented by the Wings Club and IAWA, MTA, and New York City Transit, New York City Office of the Controller, and the 369th Veterans Association Achievement Award in 2012. Now I'd like us to start our program. Ellen, I don't know if you have a particular speaker in mind you'd want to start with.
Yes, I think we should start with Ray.
Thank you. Ray, please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to share some information about the Tuskegee Airmen. And thank you very much to Ellen for reaching out to me initially to spearhead this particular program. I'm going to give a little bit of a history about the Tuskegee Airmen that you may not know. In recent history, there have been movies, Red Tails, movies, and other things that have shown the action part of the Tuskegee Airmen, the Red Tails as they were called later. But there are some things in history that you may not be aware of. The big challenge to the Tuskegee Airmen was a 1925 US Army War College statement that said that Blacks lack the intelligence, coordination, courage, and anything else necessary to fly a fighter plane. This is what they were up against because most of, if not almost all of, the commanding people in the armed forces believed this statement from the US Army War College. So when it came time to think about, I'd like to fly, they were up against this statement that said that you cannot fly. You're not smart enough. You're not coordinated enough. You just cannot do it. So we're not going to allow that to happen. In the end of 1938, 39, seeing the writing on the wall, they started a civilian flight training program. And through the efforts of a few, that there were 7 Black colleges that were hosting pilot training for Blacks. Tuskegee was one of them. And to make a long story short, thanks to the efforts of Eleanor Roosevelt, who went to Tuskegee and insisted upon Chief Anderson flying her around as a test run and not yielding to having someone else take her around, she said, I want him to fly me. And she insisted upon a picture being taken so she could take it back to Washington and say, they can fly. So thanks to her efforts and her particular gumption to go back and say they need funds to get these airfields in shape, she brought some fundraising people to Moulton Field and Tuskegee to get these airfields operational for the training. The first graduating class from Tuskegee was in 1942. There were 13 pilots who were in that class. Of those 13, 5 actually finished. They wanted to make sure that this was a successful program in spite of the belief by the US military that they expected it to fail. The original title was the Tuskegee Experiment. They later changed the name to the Tuskegee Experience. And one reason is not to confuse it with the terrible thing that happened in the Tuskegee Experiment later on. But this program involved anyone who was involved in the Tuskegee training or had to do with that Tuskegee experience from 1941 through 1949. There were approximately 16,000 people involved in that program. We're talking about men, women, pilots, grounds crew, medical people, people who packed parachutes, and so on. The most noteworthy were the pilots that went overseas, the ones that later became known as the Red Tails. They were escorting the bombers, the B-17s. Prior to their escorting these bombers, there was a high mortality rate. Each one of the bombers carried 10 people on that plane, 10 members on the plane. If they lost over 60% of them on every bombing run, you can imagine the mortality rate. When the Tuskegee pilots were asked to take over that, the amount of bombers lost went down significantly, primarily because the orders from commanding officer Benjamin O. Davis was, you do not leave the bombers under any circumstances. Your job is to protect them. You don't go chasing off to bring your ace scoring up. You don't do anything else. Your job is to protect those bombers. You will get them home at any cost. And they took that task, and they were stellar at doing that. Benjamin O. Davis graduated from West Point. He endured 4 years of absolute silence. No one spoke to him at all during his entire 4 years, except if it had to do with classwork. Else he ate alone, he lived alone, and no one spoke to him. He refused to give up. He had never returned after graduating. So that the dedication of that barracks was a realization that Benjamin O. Davis was a big part of West Point, and it's on a hill. And if you get an opportunity to take a look at it, you should. That's a general aside. As the war went on, everyone knows about the fighters overseas. Not too many people know about the 477th Bombardment Group, which is a group of pilots trained to fly B-25s. They were trained over in the United States. They never had an opportunity to fight overseas. They were trained over and over again. And when they thought they were ready, they said, we're going to do some more training. In speaking with some of the people who were involved, some of the Tuskegee Airmen who were in the 477th, in their words, they said, it was okay to go to Europe for the fighters to go and sink ships and do everything else. But they didn't want Black pilots, bombers, to go over to Europe and bomb white people in Europe. But it was okay when the war ended in Europe, all of a sudden they were ready to ship out to Japan. So as soon as the war in Europe was over, they got them ready and were ready to ship out, but the war ended before they were able to do that. There's something that you will probably read about, which is the Freeman Field Mutiny. I prefer to call it the Freeman Field Protest, because it was not a mutiny. The short story about that is a segregated commander of a field they were being trained on said, even though you are officers, you are not allowed to use the officers club. That's reserved for white officers. They said, that's not right. So they said, we're going to go in and try it anyway. They organized themselves to go in teams, to go in and work their way in. And each time they tried, they were escorted out. On one of these trials, they accidentally bumped one of the people trying to escort them out. And I'm putting it mildly. They were then charged with assault. The remaining pilots, Black 477th Bombardment Group, Black pilots, were requested and actually ordered to sign a document that said they accepted a second officer club, one for them and one for the whites. And they called it the Black Officer Club. They would be trainees. 100 of them refused to sign. And the penalty for refusing an order at that time could be punishable by death, because it was during war and they were refusing to obey an order. They were incarcerated for a short period of time. And thanks to the efforts of the NAACP, of other news media, and a few things that they actually violated the law that President Roosevelt had passed by, that all officers were to be treated the same. All but 3 were released. Those 3 were dishonorably discharged. The last of the 3 did not get his dishonorable discharge turned around until 20 or 30 years later. And that was very sad to do. And that continued to go on. At the end of the war, these heroic people who fought overseas came back in honor with medals and very proud of the job they had done. They got off of the ships. The white troops went to the right and had a great band play for them. The Black troops and pilots went off to the left, and they had 2 saxophones playing Welcome Home. And this is not something that I just found out. I heard this out of the words of Tuskegee pilot Roscoe Brown. He was talking about his experience as he returned to the United States. These pilots who fought in Europe and were exceptional pilots and proved themselves over and over again, returned to the United States expecting to become commercial pilots. They were denied access. You could not be a commercial pilot returning here. So in spite of giving their all, in spite of enduring what they had to endure to get overseas, they came back and nothing had changed. It was exactly the same. The 477th Bombardment Group endured their experience over here. Hence the term, the double V. Victory in Europe, victory at home. the song that was adopted by the Tuskegee Airmen, "Straighten Up and Fly Right," they would say over and over again, because it was a Nat King Cole tune that reminded them, no matter what happens, you straighten up and you fly right. There is no way you can expect to do anything else. Your job is your job. We came to fight the same as everyone else. We fought hard to get here and we're not leaving, no matter how many times they tell us you cannot do it. An experience I had with Mr. Bill Johnson, who was Airman Bill Johnson, who was a resident of Glen Cove. He spoke about many times in Glen Cove, watching the planes take off and fly overhead from Mitchell Field, knowing that there were no Black pilots. He said, I want to be up there. On D-Day, he arrived at Tuskegee Air Base, ready to start his pilot training. In his 93rd year, I watched the smile on his face as he spoke about that experience on D-Day, walking out to the flight field and seeing those planes flying over, knowing that those were Black pilots, and he was going to be one of them. Unfortunately, his training was over, was not quite finished when the war ended. He was asked, along with other members of his class, if they wanted to continue and finish. Most of them said no. They had had enough with the bigotry and the other things that were going on in Jim Crow South. He said, I'm going back. I came to fight in the war. The war is over. His comment to me was, even when he was there, they expected the program to end. If it were not for the Battle of the Bulge, they would have ended it then. But because they needed pilots again, they kept it going. I had a chance to meet many of these airmen when I joined the chapter. And one thing that kept me involved in the chapter was how invigorating they were, if that's the right word. They kept me included in all of their conversations. They were funny. They had a sense of humor. They were also very focused. When it came time to get down to business, in spite of their age, 89, 90, 95, 98, when it was time to get to work, they got to work. And there was no ifs, ands, or buts. They knew their job. And even though they were not as fast physically as they used to be, their mind was as fast as it ever was, right to the very end. And I'm so proud I had a chance to meet some of them and interact with them, because it's more than just meeting. It was having an opportunity to talk with them, exchange ideas, and to listen to their stories. And they were very proud of what they had done. But they also said, we had a job to do, and we went to do the job, not for any other reason than we wanted to fight as everybody else did. We should not be denied that opportunity to serve our country. And they held up for what they needed to do, even though their country did not hold up for them. Thank you very much for allowing me to share some of this information. There is so much more to tell, and every day I learn more. And that's something that I'm very proud of. They taught me an awful lot. They continue to teach me a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. And I think this is a great time to point out what we call in modern day, the intersectionality between groups with so much commonality. And as we think about the contributions that the Tuskegee Airmen made in World War II, it's also a time to point out that I think we've come to find out later years how so many of them knew what was going on in Europe, in Germany, and flew over and could see concentration camps and were in fact given orders specifically to not end the war earlier and certainly save the murder of so many people if they were able to, in fact, get the green light to bomb concentration camps. I think that that's something when we talk about what the Black American soldiers faced of whatever religion, that war and the home front, that double V, as well as the war across the ocean, fighting on two sides of the globe. We also must not forget the role of Jewish American soldiers, airmen during World War II, many of whom escaped. Hayes helped some of those people come over to the United States, as well as their own family members, people who are lucky enough to get a visa to come here, who went back and faced Nazism in an effort to try to save members who were going to perish in the Holocaust. So we can't forget how all of these issues are so intertwined and make up our nation today. So I just wanted to take that time. I know that there's been a very recent article in 2021, late 2021, 2022. I think it's been reprinted in AARP and various other publications regarding President Roosevelt's role in basically prolonging World War II, and in particular, the death sentence of so many people in the Holocaust. So I just wanted to take that time for us to reflect. And of course, we can always talk about that more as the program goes on, but I wanted to at least point that out before we go on to our next speaker. And with that in mind, I would like to point out that we're going to show a film at some point. Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to also point out in terms of honoring and legacy. One of our congregants, Alan Sorrow, pointed out that Benjamin O. Davis and his son were buried in Arlington National Cemetery. So, a lot of times, I think particularly in the work that I do, justice is very often delayed. But, you hope it's not a situation of justice denied, and there's always more we can do, but at least there's some sort of efforts to, as we also say too a lot, repair the world. So with that said, Pat, if you would please speak next before we have the interview with Mr. Thorpe. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Pat with 2 T's. My mother was born in England, and right before the war, her father decided to leave Europe. He had been there. He originally grew up in Florida, and he had been there when World War I broke out. And he didn't want to relive that, and he brought her back to the States. My father was born in Jamaica and came here when he was 13. They met at Tuskegee and married at Tuskegee. And as you heard, all of our godparents, my mother assigned us 2 godmothers, gave us boys nicknames because she didn't want us to be docile. And so I was always surrounded by people who took part in the Tuskegee Airmen experience. The women, whether they worked on the planes or were in the office or was doing security, the men, the fighter pilots, the bomber pilots. I know Clayton Lawrence was one of the bomber pilots, and he liked to refer to Freeman Field as a mutiny because they organized it. They were going to go in 6 at a time, and they had a newspaper man where they were slipping information to, and that's how I got to the Black press. But he actually thought they weren't coming back alive. They were going to send them to Asia, and that would be the end of them. There's so many stories. I want to, Sunny is on. She knows the family of Willa Brown. She was also a pilot. And when her husband passed away, she inherited Harlem Airport in Detroit. And she raised money to send some of the guys, I can't remember who they were, Sonny might fill in through the chat, to Washington to beg for them to put it into the Black colleges. They didn't want Black officers because the white men would have to salute them. And so they didn't put it into the Black colleges. That plane crashed. And they went back and they raised more money thanks to Willa. And she sent them back to Washington where they met Truman. And Truman was shocked that they hadn't put it into the Black colleges. And I think he worked with Eleanor. So that's how it got into the Black. I only know one of the pilots, Floyd Carter. showed up at a white college. I can't remember, in the Midwest somewhere. I think Indianapolis. I'm not certain about that. And they turned him away. So he filled out an application. He sent to Washington for an application. He left race blank. And he got military orders to report to the college, so they had to take him. And he said he was a speck in a sea of white folks, but they began to respect him and his intelligence and all that he could do. There's so many stories people don't know that I was privileged to find out. And one I cannot even talk about, is still top secret. I don't know why, but I'm proud of the fact. However, one of the stories that people don't know is when Eleanor got in that plane, they told Chief Anderson to circle the base and land. They really didn't. They even called the president, you know. And as soon as she got in the plane, she announced that she wanted to go, I don't remember if it was Montgomery or Birmingham. And so here's this Black man disappears with the first lady for an hour. Secret Service has no idea where she is. And I love that. But she was determined to show that they could fly. They also said that by the time they could teach a mechanic how to fix a plane, the war would be over. They took 5 planes that were part of the scrap that no one would fly, and they used the parts to make one good plane. They took any plane so they could get the parts. You know, that's what we do. You have to think outside the box. So, and Darlene's on. Her dad is responsible for the red paint on the tails. Dabney Montgomery, you saw a picture of the tanks being put on the planes. Dabney Montgomery and George Watson from New Jersey drove their Jeep onto a track and stopped a train that was transporting tanks for fuel. They didn't give them the larger tanks because they didn't want them to do the big bombings. In the movie Red Tails, they told them they could escort them to a certain point, but they couldn't go all the way because this is going to be a big media thing, and they wanted to have the white officers' planes escort them all the way into Germany. That night, they took those tanks, and they had blocks of wood. They trying to make those tanks fit. They knew they were going to Germany. I asked Roscoe, so why didn't they show up? How come you all got to go to Germany? Because you had the tanks. You made sure you had the fuel. They hijacked the train. And in Italy. And he said, oh, it was bad weather, bad weather. But they did go to Germany. They made sure they, you know, you do what you got to do. So there are so many wonderful stories that as a child growing up, I didn't realize the impact it had on me till much later. And in 2007, I was getting upset at what I was seeing in the neighborhood and the news and the communities. And I said, you know, if I could just teach some part of these guys, their drive, their dignity, you know, how they kept their temper in the face of awful things. You know, I remember Mr. Johnson telling us how he wouldn't leave the base because of lynchings. And I have newspaper letters and things where some of the guys were writing home about the lynchings when they left the base. Mark Whiten, judge, retired. He said that his mother and father married at Tuskegee and that they went shopping in town. And I know one of the stores was owned by Lionel Hampton's grandmother. So well, that was probably where they went shopping. And when they were ready to catch the bus, they had just missed the bus. There was a shack that served food. So they went in to order food. And the guy told them they couldn't eat it there. Even when the mutiny at Freeman Field, the Germans were allowed to go to the movies and go into town and get their hair cut. The men were behind barbed wire. So the ladies, when the bus came, they finally brought out the food, but the bus was there. So they decided to walk away and not pay for the food. And they got on the bus and went back to Tuskegee. That night, the airmen went over to that shack and they took everything apart. Every board, every window was neatly placed. When the man showed up, he didn't have a restaurant. So there were a lot of little incidents. One of the airmen who was from New York, Harry Stewart. Harry Stewart was one of the pilots that took Top Gun. The very first Top Gun was called the Gunnery Meet, and he was one of the 5 pilots. And he told me he was on the train with my father and Percy Sutton going to Alabama. He told me that he left with my dad, Tuskegee, to go to Kistler, Mississippi. That's where my dad got in trouble. He says it was because he wouldn't stand for something that a bigoted officer. Growing up in Jamaica, he just didn't understand, period. But back in World War II, aeronautical engineers were pilots. And I have his military records to show he got pilot pay. He was sent to South Dakota. He went to several places, Texas and then South Dakota, where he trained men in flight, every aspect of the bombers, flight being one of them. So he was a pilot, he just wasn't a red tail pilot. But all of our godparents were part of that experience. And growing up, there were incidents in school. 8th grade, a teacher told me to get up in the middle of a grammar lesson and tell the kids how much cotton I could pick a second. Well, my mother put on her best British accent and went up there. And they didn't know what to make of her because a lot of people think she was white, but Black people looking at her would know she was Black, you know. And I remember in 3rd grade, I had to write an essay on someone in our family and how they contributed to society. So I wrote about her father. And I'm a 3rd grader, and I handed it in. The teacher says, "Do you think I'm a sucker?" I didn't even know what that word was. So I told my mother. She sent me back to school the next day with the London Times cover and my grandfather's picture on the cover of the London Times. I got a passing grade, but never an apology. I wrote how he backed the first indoor light for taking pictures indoors. He worked with George Washington Carver and Henry Ford on several things. But my mother was a very accomplished woman. They were in the business of photography later in Europe. And when she was playing with the Sweethearts of Rhythm, she played 20 instruments and won the same contest that Frank Sinatra won, but you don't know about her. And the photographer, Mr. Pope, wrote to her and asked her to please come back and help take the pictures. So I got to know a lot of the women and children and grew up with a lot of them, barbecues, parties. I don't think I understood fully as a child. I just thought they were a bunch of friends that liked to have a good time. But they impacted strongly on us in the ways we conducted ourselves. And some of the children are on today, and they are active members. Sonny's on the West Coast. Amelia is the wife of Dabney Montgomery, who tried to vote in Alabama and could have been lynched. He left. Martin Luther King wrote to him and asked him to please come and help provide security on the march. He told me he was scared. He wasn't going back to Alabama, but when he thought about it, he said, "Pat, if it's righteous, you got to do it. You got to trust God." And he went back. There's so many gifts. Clayton Lawrence once told me, "Pat, don't make excuses. Just do it and apologize later." I was working on something and I know it's going to get a lot of flack. He said, "Just do it, apologize later." And that's been my motto. That and Lee Archer, "Don't tell me I can't, I'm going to show you I can." And these are the things I got from the airmen and the women. And I'll take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat. Yeah, I just wanted to also point out that for many of the gentlemen that we're talking about and the ladies, this was their first time. The ones from the North faced legalized segregation and overt discrimination and racism for the first time in their lives. So I remember my father talking about, someone born in the Bronx and going down to Alabama for training. This is the first time that they had to sit in the back of a train. And here I am in uniform and have to endure those indignities. So it's the first for many. I think Pat wanted to add to that.
It was the front of the train. When they got to
right.
the
Mason-Dixon
line, they were forced, even though they had military orders,
yeah,
were forced to get up and go to the front. Bill Wheeler, you may know Bill Wheeler from Uniondale. He said by the time they got to Tuskegee, he had turned black from all the soot from the coals.
Exactly. So I thought it was important for us to highlight that. And something else, Lionel Hampton is my late grandmother's first cousin. So we are relatives. So now we're going to hear, thank you, a video from an actual Tuskegee Airman, an interview. So please, tech people, tech wizards, take it away.
I'd like to introduce you to Tuskegee Airman Herbert Thorpe, class of 45G TE, which is twin engine. Mr. Thorpe, I'm going to ask you a few questions if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts. When did you first have an interest in flying?
Well, I was in junior high school and high school. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I used to build little model airplanes and fly them around. And then I used to go to the local airfield there in Brooklyn to watch the airplanes flying around. And then I thought that that would be something good to do. But in the meantime, before I went that route, I joined the CCC camps and went to camps in upstate New York and wound up in the camp in Maryland, New York, and went back to Brooklyn, and I enlisted in the Army. And then from enlisting in the Army, I went to Troy, New York. I wanted to join the Signal Corps. And I received Signal Corps training in Troy, New York, from students at RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
That's very good. Could you clarify what the CCC is you were talking about?
CCC camp, I went right out the year I graduated from high school, 1940.
What was the CCC? What do those letters stand for?
Civilian Conservation Corps.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
That was started by President Roosevelt.
Oh.
During the Depression.
That's good.
There were camps all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And from there, I went back home, and then I didn't have much success at home, so I enlisted in the Army. That was in 1941.
Right. Another question for you. What are your memories of the Tuskegee experience? Your positive memories, your not so positive, but your positive experience, because the Tuskegee experience itself hopefully was mostly positive. If you would share your thoughts.
Yeah, mostly positive. The Tuskegee experience was mostly positive, except for the incidents I ran into when I got to New Orleans on my way to Tuskegee. And I was trying to get a train to go from New Orleans to Mississippi. And I had to give up my government ticket and get a civilian ticket. Then I had to go through the segregated train station, which I had never seen before. It's the first time I ever experienced that. And then from when I passed all the aptitude testing at Biloxi, Mississippi, I was sent on to Tuskegee with another group of young men. I don't remember. I remember some of them, but not too many of them. And then we were separated into classes, and we started our flying training. And first, basic training at primary training rather at Moulton Field at Tuskegee Institute. I was a part of the institute, and then we went to basic training, and from basic training some of us were separated out. I was chosen to go to twin engine training. And so they sent me to Texas for bombardier navigator training. And I passed all of those classes. And I was commissioned after I completed bombardier navigator training. I was commissioned in December of 1943 and sent back to Tuskegee. And then they put me into the advanced training in the B-25 aircraft. I went through the B-25 program and completed that in the middle of 1945. The war had just ended when I finished. In fact, the war was over before I finished, actually. I got my certification as a twin engine pilot after the war was over. And they gave us the option of going to the 477th. Some of my class went to the 477th. I elected to leave the service and go back to Brooklyn. I did that. And I went to school, to college on the GI Bill in New York City. And got my degree as an electrical engineer. And I finished that degree and began my civil service with the U.S. Army Air Corps.
Oh.
Civil service of the U.S. Army. Well, the Air Force was not in existence until 1947, actually. Primary to that was all U.S. Army Air Corps.
Thank
So
you.
my discharge says U.S. Army Air Corps.
Thank you. What is your hope for the future of this country and the role that youth can or should play in that future?
Well, I see some possibility for hope, but my hesitation is that I'm not sure that the young people that are seniors in high school and freshmen and sophomores in college are not very interested in politics, although they like to demonstrate and so forth. But once the demonstration is over, there's a saying that you have to go from rhetoric to reality, and that's where the reality begins. They've got to get more interested in local politics and join their local school boards and boards in the politics in their communities and so forth, and make their voices heard where the money goes and where the laws are made and where the rules and regulations are made. And that's where the changes, I think, have to be. And I think that they're going to be more inclined to do that, but they're not as quick to do it as I think they ought to be.
Thank you, Ray. And now I'd like to introduce Kim LeBlanc, our Tuskegee granddaughter. Kim, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Hearing Mr. Renard and Ms. Pat talk about their experiences and the stories they've heard. I too have heard many stories very similar. I've heard about the train rides from the north down south to, you know, they get to a certain point and hey, you've got to get up and move to a new location. My grandfather also talked a lot about the German prisoners that were right outside of the base and were free to go to the movie theater, but he was not. My grandfather was Dempsey Morgan. He was born in Detroit. His mother died when he was 5. Don't know much about his mother. My grandfather was very, very smart. He was a chemist. He loved anything about learning. He loved school. He also, like Benjamin O. Davis, attended West Point, but did not last very long because he received very similar, if not the same, treatment that Benjamin Davis received. So he left there. He got a degree, I think, in chemistry, at University of Detroit. I'm not sure, but he went to school, and then he became a Tuskegee Airman. And I didn't know my grandfather till I was about 13 years old. My grandfather, when he came back from the war, he had what we call today PTSD, and we always heard stories of him sitting and looking out the window, smoking his pipe, not being able to deal with his children or any of that. He tried really hard. Oh, there's pictures. Those are my grandparents and my grandfather. The lady next to my grandfather is my grandmother's mother, and the lady next to my grandmother is my grandfather's stepmother. My grandfather, though, he was a very smart guy. He became a Tuskegee Airman. He wanted to fly. He wanted to serve his country, and he did. And when he came back, he wanted to become a pilot. And he received interviews. And when he showed up for the interviews and they realized that he was a Black man, he couldn't do it. And the next best thing that he could do was a bus driver. So he became a bus driver. In this picture, my grandfather, yeah, okay. So that's my grandfather, great guy. When he came back from the war, he was shell-shocked. He and my grandmother, unfortunately, were not able to maintain their relationship. My grandfather became really involved in the Baha'i church. I don't know if it's called the church, but he got really involved in Baha'i, the Baha'i religion, and traveled the world teaching others and kind of like a disciple for the Baha'is. But he talked about what it was like being overseas. He talked about how when he was there, it was like a completely different place than where he had come from. I think often how hard it must have been for him and for the others to be in this place, fighting for this country, fighting for people that they don't even know. And he comes back. This guy right here is my great uncle. He is my grandmother's brother. He was also a Tuskegee Airman, but I think he was ground crew, Charles Goldsby, Uncle Chuck. But we often talk about in my family just how much my grandfather and so many others sacrificed for this country, for people that they don't know, just for their own reasons, but also for their to make a statement, to move things forward for people in this country. And when he came back, after he had been through so much, when he came back, he was still disrespected. He wore the uniform of this country, and it didn't give him a foot up or a leg up anywhere. I'm trying to think what else about my grandfather. I just know him as Dempsey. He was my grandfather. I saw when I was 13, we were watching the old Tuskegee Airmen movie with Lawrence Fishburne, and I saw they were showing pictures at the very end, black and white pictures, and we saw a picture of him. And I said, we need to meet him. And we reached out and found him and drove down to Bristol, Virginia, where he and his wife lived. And from that moment, he was in my life. He would come to my school to speak about the Tuskegee Airmen and his experiences. I was having a conversation with my husband about an hour ago, and we were talking about heroes, and we were talking about our ancestors, and we were saying how strong our ancestors have been. And I said to him, our ancestors were strong, and we look at them like they were mighty people, but they were just ordinary people. That's all they were just ordinary people like you and I, people who saw something they didn't like in this world and stood up and made a difference and did something about it. I am proud to be the daughter of Dempsey Morgan. I wish that he had been involved in our lives a lot longer, but I'm a wife of a combat veteran, and I know that the help that we have now was not available to him then. So I wonder what things would have been like had he been able to get that help, and had he been able to have the respect that he deserved when he returned to the United States. I'm going to ask if you can scroll up to the picture where the gentlemen are leaning or kneeling by the plane. Yep. So I'm sure most of you have probably seen this picture. This is a very famous picture. It's in the Smithsonian. But the gentleman that is to our left, directly under where it says Darwin, that's my grandfather. So if you ever see this picture, you know who that is. But we're very proud of him. And, you know, he was a human being and he wasn't perfect and he was an ordinary man. And he had his host of problems and like everybody else, but he stepped up when the country needed him to step up. He stepped up, not just for the country, but for people of color across this country and over the world, because once the Germans got a hold of, you know, knowing who these Black men were up in the sky, word got out that these were some fierce fighter pilots. And from what my grandfather told me is that the German pilots actually kind of respected them because of how good they were. So yeah, I'm proud. I'm just proud. And you know, watching Red Tails and watching, oops, sorry, I guess there's an echo. But watching Red Tails and just thinking, this is, you know, this guy that I know that I'm related to, he was up in the air doing this stuff. And it just amazes me every day to think about that and how brave and courageous he was. Thank you. I think that's it for me. Oh, I wanted to say one thing about the refugee program, which brings in the Jewish people. So the refugee program actually started right after, towards the tail end, right after World War II. And the refugee program was established to bring over Jewish refugees from overseas, from Europe. And that's really how the United States Refugee Admissions Program came into full effect, was because of that moment. And then they just built on the program from that moment forward. So just want to throw that in there.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Kim. Prior to that, it was private organizations like HIAS, for example, no codified treaty establishing refugees. Thank you. I did put in the web address of the local chapter in the chat box if anyone would like some more information. And another thing, Kim, I wanted to tie in what you were saying about the Germans and flying is that, again, that theme of multiple enemies, because I know that Pat and Ray both talked about concern about friendly fire. So the Tuskegee Airmen were concerned about being fired upon, not just by the Germans, but also, unfortunately, by Americans.
And my grandfather talked about that. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, he talked about that. He talked about they would be in the air and they would come around to escort, and the guns from the planes that they were escorting would be turned on them. Like some of these people knew that these were Black men flying planes. It wasn't that they were mistaken that, you know, they were Germans. No, they knew what they were doing. And I don't know if Mr. Renard or Miss Pat know more than I do, because I'm just the granddaughter who hears stories, you know, every once in a while when he was living. But he talked about just, it was like a no-win situation for them, you know, just no-win situation. They were there and they weren't treated well in the United States. They go there and they come back and they're still not treated right in the United States. And even overseas, the people that they're protecting are giving them a hard time. So.
Pat, would you please take the mic? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. There were a couple of things I should have mentioned. I was unaware up until very recently how the Jewish organizations were asking Roosevelt to bomb the crematoriums, and they wouldn't do it. And I know the Airmen bombed some of the tracks and some of the factories. Well, they didn't bomb them, they escorted people, but Lee Archer took out a train. One of the other guys took out a ship with supplies and it exploded and it went up into his cockpit and all that they went through to help. But Alexander Jefferson, who we lost very recently, when he was released, he went to the camps and it's online and he talks about what he saw. I've been trying to make myself go to the museum for a couple of years, but I know I'm going to bawl and cry my eyes out. And I haven't been able to bring myself to do that at this time so far. But I did talk to Roscoe Brown when the movie Red Tails came out. And I said, you know, I know your mama didn't know what the heck you all were doing up there in that sky. I said, if she knew what you were doing, you can't tell me people weren't falling out of planes and whatnot. And he was one of the pilots who took out the first jet, the second jet. He took out the second jet. So I asked him about it, and he told me they learned to maneuver their rudder. And he can make a sharp right, drop down, come up behind the jet and shoot it down. And that's how they were able to defend the bomber pilots and take out jets, because we didn't have jets at that point that I'm aware of at any rate. So that's something I wanted to let you know, Kim, that they really, practice makes perfect. That was drummed into you as a child. Well, they weren't called for a long time and they just kept practicing till they learned how to maneuver. And that's how they were able to take out the German jets.
There was one more thing, if I just can have a minute. My grandfather told us that he had flown about 181 missions. He had written this book. It's mostly about his Baha'i faith, but it has a small chapter in it about being a Tuskegee Airman. And he had said that he was only given credit for 70. And when he asked why he was only given credit for 70, they told him because his commanding officer had 72 and he couldn't have more. He couldn't have more missions than his commanding officer, so they gave him 70.
Yeah, many of the guys, they had more missions than the other pilots. Luther Smith, Friday the 13th, his 13th mission for that period. Now, it was Friday the 13th, but he was scheduled to go home when he had a mission and he got shot down. And he was the one where the explosion came up and he tried to turn his plane upside down and drop out and his leg got tangled up and blacked out a few times. And he talks about what it was like in the German prison camps as well. But many of them flew far more missions than they got credit for. Lee Archer, they wouldn't give him the 5th, making him an ace pilot because they said he drove the plane into a mountain. He didn't shoot it down. I thought, well, you know, if you can drive a plane, if
he didn't waste any ammunition,
but they wouldn't make him an ace pilot.
He didn't waste any ammunition.
Smart man.
Yeah. It boggles my mind. And to see what's going on in our country, here we are. So all we can do is just be the best that we can do and stand up for what's right. And being related to somebody who I know did that and believed in it and was willing to sacrifice his life because of what he believed in. I'm just proud and honored.
I want to use that as a great segue, Kim, to point out that there are other descendants here with us this afternoon who pointed things out. And like we said, we would save time for questions and answers, but I also want to expand that and say for comments. I know that Linda Sonny Simpson pointed out that Tuskegee Airman Lieutenant, is it the LTC? I should know this. Is that Lieutenant Corporal? Well, Alexander Jefferson of the 332nd was shot down 2 days before the invasion of southern France on August 12, 1944, and he was a German prisoner of war. So that's just something I wanted to make sure that we saw that. And there's some other comments the content of what everyone is saying and what everyone is writing is so interesting. Please make sure you do read the comments. They are rich. I see there's a hand raised. So let's see. Would you unmute yourself, Ms. Montgomery?
I just did.
Oh, thank you.
I can say something now? Okay. I want to say, first of all, to the three presenters and to you also, moderator, this is a wonderful program. I had never heard before, but that's okay, because I'm sure there's so much more that I have yet to hear. But I wanted to say to Ms. LeBlanc that she was saying that her grandfather was just an ordinary man. I have to differ with you on that, because that's how these airmen were treated, as just ordinary people. But for the things that they went through, the indignities that they had to suffer, they were not ordinary people. The men and the women, because as you know, women serve with these people, airmen. But don't ever say that again, that your grandfather was ordinary, because he was not ordinary. Now, humble, I'll agree to that they were humble people, the ones that I met, but ordinary, never. Because an ordinary person would never be able to go through what these people endured, okay? So you have to change
You're absolutely
that.
right. You're absolutely right.
That word, okay?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Thank you for pointing that out. You're right.
Okay. Just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Ellen, should we open up the floor to comments, questions, and answers?
Yes, we should.
Thank you. And thank you, speakers.
If I may, there is a question in the chat from Alan Zarrow. He says, was it true that Jen Davis Sr. was the first Black soldier to achieve the rank of general officer?
Yes, I was told that he was.
Rob,
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Yes, yeah, I have a question. I know that the Air Force and the CIA were set up under an act around 1947 or 8, which created Billy Mitchell's dream of an Air Force. I was curious to know if the airmen were given any role in developing the modern Air Force after the Second World War was over.
Would you repeat that, please?
In other words, what I'm saying is the Air Force was set up as a separate entity after the Second World War. And those people who were in the Army Air Force were, of course, incorporated into the modern Air Force and given roles as developers of what we now call the Air Force. I was curious to know if the airmen were given equal roles in that capacity of developing the modern Air Force after the World War II was over.
If I'm not mistaken, when they set up the Air Force, they said it would be set up as a non-segregated unit. So that was no longer necessary to have a segregated Air Force or air unit. So they became part of the Air Force by that statement. So I would imagine that that is their role. They achieved what I guess they had kind of hoped to do, was to make the pilot advantage or the pilot opportunity available for everyone as one unit and not two. They decided it was too expensive to run two Air Forces and 2 units, which is what it had been.
Thank you.
When they met Truman before they set it up in the Black colleges, he told them if they had the nerve to fly here in that bucket, he had the nerve to stand with them. And when he integrated the armed forces, I have newspaper clippings and things that say, oh, it's over. This will never work. We're not going to be able to defend our country, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of the men stayed in because they love flying. Some rose, some became generals, one a brigadier general. Um, Floyd Carter was the first to, I'm trying to remember, Ray, he was the first to have a jet.
He was the commander of a jet unit,
Yeah.
and I believe he was the commander of the Berlin airlift.
Yes, yes. And Span Watson went on after he retired. I think he was head of the FAA here in New York. Elwood Driver became the head of the transportation in Washington, D.C. But I know the local guys who fought in the boardrooms, Lee Archer, they fought the school boards. They fought to get their kids equal education here in Nassau County, suing the bus companies. They continued those battles to help get, get us to where we should have been doing better than we are right now. I'm very upset with a lot of stuff that's going on. I'm not recognizing my country anymore, but I know I come from good stuff. These men and women were awesome, and they took us where we are, and we need to keep our foot forward and our heads high and continue their fight.
That's for sure. I told you all I would look for, when we were doing our dry run, I'd look for a photo of my father. Pat had mentioned a studio in Harlem, a photography studio, and I wanted to share this photo. And his uncle was a photographer and took this photo of him in uniform. So I wanted to share that with everyone. The best quality I could scan. It doesn't do the actual photo justice, but I wanted to share it in any case. And my father did continue to become very involved in local politics in Nassau County, exactly what you're saying, Pat. You're muted. We can't hear you, Pat.
I said they made inroads. Darlene DeFore reminded me her father took part in the Great Train Robbery also. She's on. And Sunny had a message that she posted into the chat room that is very interesting. So I don't know if you want to have them speak at some point, or Miss Montgomery.
That would be beautiful if they would share with us.
What are you asking, Pat?
I was asking you, Darlene, or Denise Peace is on, Sunny's on, to share your memories of something important with the group.
Well, as you mentioned, Dabney was a part of the Great Train Robbery. I just want you all to know, I did not know. When I married him, I did not know he was a Tuskegee Airman. It wasn't until, as you mentioned, the Tuskegee Airman movie with Lawrence Fishburne was when he confessed to me he was a part of that group. I knew he was I knew he served in World War II. I knew he was overseas, but he did not mention being a part of the Tuskegee Airmen. Therefore, he did not mention to me that he was a felon, that he took part in the Great Train Robbery. I guess, but I was told later by our Eastern Region president that he couldn't tell me that because it was still an ongoing felony, and if they were identified as being a part of that Great Train Robbery, he could be arrested. So I guess in a sense, I'm glad he never said it to me, but his experience as a Tuskegee Airman, when he did start to talk about it, was a very interesting one because he served over in Italy. After his training, basic training, he was sent to Italy, and that's where he stayed until his discharge. And it was just so many things. He was a ground crewman. He always said how he admired the pilots that would come to, before he was drafted, how he would admire these Black soldiers that would come to Selma, Alabama for a break. And they were Tuskegee Airmen, and his sister, his two biological sisters and his stepsister, they dated these men. He said they were always such gentlemen. They will always come to Selma, never causing any problems and just having a good time. And he said how he always wanted to be like them, not knowing that after he was drafted, and he went to Mississippi and did basic training there. Then he was sent to Virginia, Fort Lee, to do some more training. They trained him to manage the food and clothing warehouse. And that was his job in Italy. That he said he would tell the airmen after, later in life, okay, you were pilots, but I had to keep you fed and clothed, so you're not better than me. They used to banter, go back and forth, and they used to have so much fun teasing each other, but always with respect, always with respect. But he said that his job there, as I said, to feed and clothe the airmen and all of the ground crew as well, he had the obligation to transport the German prisoners as well. And he said that, they would look at him, as if to say, who are you? And one day he was transporting a prisoner, and he just said he just started singing his school song, his high school anthem. It turned out that it was the melody of the German anthem. He was singing the words in English, the school anthem words, and the prisoner was singing the anthem in German, his national anthem. He said, and one thing about music, you don't have to understand each other's language, but music does bring people together. And Mr. Burns, you would know that. That's your field, okay? But he said how that after that experience singing his school hymn, the prisoner showed him a great deal of respect, because it was as if to say, oh, you're one of me, because they had this common exchange. But he was also, after he left the war, he enrolled into Livingstone College in Salisbury, North Carolina, and graduated with a degree in religious education. And he came to New York, and he just did things because he just wanted to be a community person. But then, as Pat pointed out, he was one of Dr. Martin Luther King's bodyguards in the Selma to Montgomery March. And that in and of itself, he said he didn't know which was worse, World War II or that Civil Rights March, but they were both hateful. And he managed to, survive all of that. So he lived to be 93. I was a child bride, and I had, he was just a wonderful person. That's why I was saying they were not ordinary people, by far not ordinary people. Okay, so that's I could go on and on, but we don't have time
Amelia,
to listen to.
Someone posted, what did him and Martin Luther King Jr. share a godmother?
Oh, they shared a godmother. They were both in Boston. Reverend King, then before he became doctor, he was studying at the Boston in Boston University, getting his doctorate. And Dabney was at the Boston School of Music. He studied ballet. And it turned out Dabney, and no matter where he went, he was always had to be a Sunday school teacher. He was just into, his belief, a strong belief, and he would teach Sunday school. He even taught Sunday school to the soldiers in Italy. But anyway, he met Dr. King through a lady that he attended this church in Boston, and he met this lady who became very fond of him. And she told him she wanted him to come one Sunday to dinner to meet her other godson. And so he said, sure, he would love to do that. And when he arrived, it was Martin Luther King, who was there with his fiancée, Coretta Scott, because she was also attending the Boston School of Music and studying voice. And they became very good friends. And that's So I guess in a sense you could say they were god brothers, but they met through this lady in Boston. I forgot her name, so forgive me for that. But anyway, that was his first connection. And he said that he was invited to their wedding. And if he had known that Martin Luther King was going to become famous, he would have saved the wedding invitation. He wasn't able to go to the wedding, but he sent them a gift. He did send them a crystal dinner bell as a gift. And he said, but if he had known Dr. King was going to be famous, he would have kept that invitation. So that's, you know, he was just so fond of Dr. King, and whatever he could do to work with him for civil rights, he did it. And he was not. Oh, can I just ask, I'm a member of the Incorporated, and so we have some heritage members, Ms. LeBlanc and Ms. Katz, Cynthia, you are our heritage members. Your relatives are Tuskegee Airmen. I need their resumes. Do you have biographical sketch of your family members? Because we're collecting the biographies of as many donors as we can get. So it's
now, my father was not a Tuskegee Airman. He was a member of the Army Air Corps, played the clarinet during World War II, but he was not. Okay. He was not a Tuskegee Airman.
Okay, I misunderstood. But Mr. LeBlanc, your grandfather.
Yes.
Yeah. So my grandfather was a fighter pilot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to join. If you can, you put the information in the chat, or maybe it can be shared later on.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I have, Ms. Pat, I wrote your email address down. So.
Okay, thank you. And we'll.
Okay, so if I can get, if you have access to his biography, a biological sketch, I would like that, because we're trying to collect as many as possible.
Sure. Yeah, it's my grandfather. I've got a lot of stuff about him. So.
Well, okay, well, you can send it to me through I'll put my email address in the chat.
Wonderful. And can I include, my mom's actually on here too, as her father.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Cynthia, Sunny would like to say something. She's posted some really interesting.
That would be lovely.
In the chat.
That would be lovely.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you, Pat. I just wanted to share that the tie between, I'm really glad to see this topic, the Tuskegee Airmen and the Jewish people, because for years it has been my plan to have I don't want to call it a seminar, but something at the National Convention showing the kinship between Tuskegee Airmen and Jewish people, especially during World War II. There are a number of airmen. I posted that Lieutenant, LTC means Lieutenant Colonel, Cynthia. But Alexander Jefferson was at how do you pronounce it? Dachau, D-A-C-H-U, what's the correct pronunciation, that concentration camp?
Dachau.
Thank you. Was there, and he observed, he talks about what he observes, and when he talks about it, it is with great pain. And I don't need to go into the details. You all know how horrible those camps were, so we don't even need to go into the misery and the awfulness of that. But he was there and sickened by it. But also, one of the airmen still alive, he wasn't there, but he has formed relationships with different Jewish organizations. His name is Enoch Woodhouse. Enoch Woodhouse the third. He's a lawyer and a very distinguished gentleman who and he lives in Boston. You can Google his name, but he's got lots of associations, remarkable affiliations with various Jewish organizations, and has made a tremendous name for himself. He speaks and writes in German. I don't know if he speaks Hebrew, but I wouldn't be surprised. I speak Yiddish. I love Yiddish, by the way. But there has been a great kinship between people who just happen to be Tuskegee Airmen and Jewish causes, and a number of marriages and unions between Tuskegee Airmen and Jewish women. And I remember that James Bernard Knighton, one of the airmen who was married to Barbara Knighton. Barbara Knighton's from New York, and she was an activist with the New York, against the housing situation in New York and the restrictive covenants and all of that. And there are other stories, none of which are coming to my mind right away, but there is a strong tie, and hopefully one of these days, sooner than later, I can, since I've been trying to do this for the last 10 years, I would love to see this topic developed even further to show the ties. And at the time, I wanted the airmen to speak, but many of us have records, and the University of California at Riverside has a Tuskegee Airmen Archives, and my dad's papers are there, but they have written about their kinship with Jewish Americans and just Jewish people, because there's such a similarity in our stories. The hatred based on religion, based on skin, and there was that connection. And look at all the Jewish people who were involved in the bus boycotts, who went down to the South, who were on those freedom rides. And it's unfortunate that that relationship doesn't get talked about more, because it is really, there's so much dissension between various groups, and Blacks and Jewish people in this country nowadays, young people wouldn't even know that there was a lot of people, Jewish people, who were fighting for the rights of Black people during the 50s and 60s and 70s. So,
wasn't the NAACP started by Jewish folks as well?
Yeah, and I have a cute little story associated with that. When my dad was at UCLA, and he graduated in '52, he said there were more Jewish people in the NAACP than there were Black people. And, he said all this with fondness and affection. And I have stories, but I don't want to go on. I just wanted to throw that out. So thank you for giving me the time. And thank you so very much, Cynthia and Rabbi. Is it Rabbi or Rabbiina? Which would, you're muted. But thank you all for putting this on. I think it's really, really important. I wish there were more people on it, but hey, we're all on there, and we'll all go our ways and share the story, and it's a ripple effect. We'll get bigger. Thank you.
May I ask that Darlene DeFore speak, and then Denise Pease?
Sure. I'll just say a little bit about my father, who was actually born in Cologne, Panama, to Trinidadian parents, but came to the United States actually as a baby. And he died at 100 on December 8th, 2018. And going through his papers, I actually found these documents where they were proving how long he and my grandmother had been in this country, because I think he was trying to get some kind of promotion in the military, and that had to be proven. But going through people's papers, you find so much. My father actually was on ground crew and was drafted. He was a college student at City College, taking courses in business administration and working at night, and and was drafted. And he tells me this story about him and my grandmother going down to, he tells me it was a train station on 125th Street and Lexington Avenue. And at that point, they're all sitting there waiting. And he saw, he said, this older, older white Italian woman just crying because she had raised her grandson and he was being shipped off to war. And my grandmother was there comforting her, telling her, he'll be okay, he'll be okay. So after that was over, well, continued, they then call the soldiers and then tell them to separate. White soldiers over here, Black soldiers over here. She talked about that division that started, you know, right, yeah, right then and there. He, a lot of the time, he actually didn't talk about this much. It started coming out later. And one of my regrets is not going to the conventions early on, because the conferences were at the same time. I'm a social psychologist. The conferences were at the same time as the Association of Black Psychology conferences. And I needed those conferences to fuel me for the next year, all the stuff I had to experience where, you know, with our workplace, but not realizing how much I would have gained from going to the Tuskegee Airmen conferences. As I think I mentioned, my father was an administrator, and he actually did so well in administration school that they retained him as an instructor. And when he found out that his unit was going to be shipped off overseas to Italy, he requested that they release him so that he can go with his group, because he did not want to be left behind. And then ended up then shipping out. And he always tells me the story of when they land, they're coming in on ships, seeing all the sunken vessels that had, because that bombing had happened like the night, you know, a couple of nights before, and all of them just seeing this. And he said, he found out that a lot of the people in our chapter were on the same convoy. And he said, if they had bombed that, you know, we all would have been, you know, that would have been it for all of us. So those are just some of the stories that I recall. He used his skill actually as an administrator to move up in the post office. He ended up, you know, starting as a clerk and then being an administrator in the post office. He's one of the people who's responsible for express mail. Yeah, and so, but he used those skills that he learned and developed in the military for his career. And then he's also a real estate broker. And so he used, those skills that he started developing in the military. And then through his education, when he went on to NYU to get his BA, et cetera, in business administration school and accounting. Yeah, so that's I'll leave it there. There's a zillion stories that we all have, and you know, there's a lot. Yeah, Pat is asking me to talk about the red paint.
Also, the pictures. You know, you can mention the pictures and how he had to. Didn't have the dark room.
Yeah, he and I think some of that rubbed off on me. Loving photography.
Excuse me, Darlene. I just wanted to say, I wanted to be mindful of the time.
Yes,
and
that's
I
why
know
I was
that
stop.
A lot of people may need to hop off the call, but I'd like to ask you to allow those who would like to leave, and thank everyone for participating. And then those of us who can stay on for additional treasured stories. Thank you.
I actually have to get going in a little bit. Some of you know that I'm in the middle of driving from North Carolina back home to Virginia. We had an issue with our rental property in North Carolina. So I need to hop off in just a moment so we can pick up my other child at our friend's house. But thank you I will stay on for a few more minutes if anybody has any questions. But thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. And I'm honored to be a part of this, and I just appreciate, oh wait, somebody knows my grandparents, or my grandfather. But thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak about my grandfather and these extraordinary individuals that we are related to and get our strength from. So thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you very much.
Kim, it was a pleasure meeting you. Hopefully we can speak again sometime in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I may have to leave shortly also. One other comment I'd like to make is the airmen were always forward thinking. They paid it forward. They always wanted to get the message out to youth that they can do anything they set their mind to. Go to school, get your education, and stay focused. There's nothing you can do, you cannot do. You can fly if you want to. All you have to do is have that desire and the drive. And that was their message always. They were always teachers to pay what they had done forward.
Hi, I'm Beatrice Taylor, Kim's mother, and it was my father who was a Tuskegee Airman. And I'd like to tell you just a few things that I remember him telling me about. And one was that when they first went to war and they lost a person or a plane went down, they would all cry. He said they would cry all night. They were just really upset that they had lost a friend and a brother. He said, but after a few weeks and they lost more and more people, there was no crying. They just got used to it. It was a terrible thing, but they just kept on moving.
Thank you for sharing it. Thank you. Ms. Montgomery has her hand raised.
No, I was just saying I sent a message to Ms. LeBlanc about my address, my phone number and my email address.
Yes, I was just writing it down. I have it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Are we going to be, is the recording of this going to be sent out to those who like either participated or attended?
Here's the thing, Kim. It can be done. I just spoke to a tech person who told me that it can be done, but we need the permission of all the people involved in the program. So the people at the Govan chapter, we would need permission, and Kim. And I think that's what we need to do. It is possible. Otherwise, it has been recorded and it will be on our Facebook, our Bashir Facebook page. It will always be there. But as far as sending it out, which is what I asked this afternoon, that's what I was told.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think, Mom, did you have one other thing else? You weren't muted. Do you have anything else to say?
Yeah. Yes. And I don't know if some of the other airmen had this happen, but he was interviewed by the National Archives. And so you can go down there and pull up his name. And there's a long interview. They're interviewing him in his older age, really, about what he did and about what he thought and so forth. And there's an exhibit in England of my father, and I think there were 27, and Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, airmen who actually dropped bombs on the airfield of do you remember, Kim, what country that was?
I think it was in Italy.
Yeah,
it's either Italy or North Africa. I don't know, but yeah, North Africa, Miss Pat. Okay.
And they actually dropped. They were the ones that made the air knocked out so many planes that Italy could not attack us like they had planned. Yeah. And one other thing, my father said when he was in Italy, he met the Pope. And he said in those days, they didn't talk to you about carrying a gun and all. And he had a loaded gun and he was standing right next to the Pope talking. He said you couldn't do that today, but then it wasn't a big thing. I want to thank my daughter for doing our family interest about Dempsey.
At this time, I would love it if Denise could share her story.
And thank you very much. And I am so interested in this whole conversation because I'm learning a lot about my father through this conversation. Not that I didn't know my father, but I didn't know about this experience. I think I've told Pat and some of the members of the club that I kind of found out my father was a Tuskegee Airman by accident. My father came back and he married my mother. Dr. Carter G. Woodson and Mother Gaston, as a matter of fact, introduced my father to my mother. So my father was very much into studying our history, the African-American experience.
Right.
So it was unusual for me not to have heard that he was a Tuskegee Airman. But he went to school, he got his bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering and became a dean at Suffolk Community College. So about 40 years ago, I happened to meet Dr. Roscoe Brown at a 100 Black Men's function. And he said to me, I looked familiar. And I said, well, Dr. Brown, you're the president of Bronx Community College. You must know my father, William Pease. He's a dean at Suffolk Community College. He said, Bill Pease is your dad? I know your dad. Oh, I can tell you stories about your dad. No, I can't tell you those stories. He said, I knew your dad before he met your mother. And I said, oh, that's nice. He said, your dad was at Tuskegee with me. We were at Tuskegee Airmen. And I said, oh no, you must confuse my dad with someone else. I know there's another William Pease who's a writer of Black history, but that's not my dad. My dad, was born in, he said, I know your father. He was at Tuskegee with me. Now, if I would have thought about it, my grandmother had said at one time that they used to have to send money to a family relative so that every Sunday, who lived in Alabama, that she would bring food to my father, but I didn't know where my father was. And I just thought he was being picky. But then when I got home, I started asking him questions. And all I said to him was, I met Dr. Brown, and he said that you were at Tuskegee with him and that you were a Tuskegee Airman. And all he said was, yes. That was the end of the conversation. I wish we would have had more of a conversation. My father is deceased. But the more I hear about my father, about the Tuskegee Airmen, I really understand his character. He instilled in me, you can do everything. Nothing is past you. And you have to stick to it and you have to make commitments in life. He was with my mother. My mother developed schizophrenia when I was young. He was the husband who was there with her. He stuck with her throughout their marriage. He went back to school again. And even through all of my trials and tribulations, he instilled in me that I could do anything in the world. And I think that's why I became an Obama appointee. So, I had a brain injury 30 years ago. I had to learn to read, write, and speak again. And I have epilepsy, but I ran the federal buildings and the procurement and technology. I was the regional administrator of GSA for the president. And I moved the federal family back into the World Trade Center when everybody said it couldn't be done. So I think the blood of Tuskegee Airmen runs into their offspring. So I thank you for this program, really, because the more I hear about Tuskegee Airmen, I also know more about my dad. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And what a lovely way to conclude this program. That is so inspiring. And thank you all for sharing. And thank you, Ellen and Rabbi, for putting together such a beautiful, beautiful program. It's been an honor to meet everyone and to work with everyone. Thank you so much. Until our paths cross again.
Thank you. And thank you, Cynthia, for bringing it home.
I'll add
Thank you.
my thanks to everyone. That was fascinating, and I'm I'm so awed by all of your stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ray, I have your stuff. So I wrote it down.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you. And that concludes our
Thank you,
program.
everyone. Have a
Thank
great
you.
evening.
Yes, and a
Thank
good week. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Thank you all.
Shavua Tov.
Sei Gazette.
Indeed.
Okay, good night. Love you, Pat.
Thank you.